Oh, wow.
Hey, good. Hi, Miranda. How's it going?
It's okay. You may have heard the tail end of the tragedy of the lost bouncy ball.
Oh, no.
Otherwise, it's going very well.
Nice. Well, thank you so much for joining us this evening, and certainly appreciate your time and the opportunity to have this conversation with you tonight. We're doing kind of a local look at some issues, doing a little different approach to maybe the traditional debate format. And my name is Paul Holland, for folks who are watching. I'm pleased to be the moderator for tonight's event. I'm a little bit about me. I'm a lifelong Arlingtonian and graduate of Arlington Public Schools, went to Taylor, Swanson, and W&L. I've been active in civic matters for, 15 years or so, and have been chair of the Fiscal Affairs Advisory Commission and the Park and Rec Commission, president of my civic association, and now live in Waverly Hills with my wife and two school-age kids who are at Glebe and in third grade and kindergarten. So the goal for tonight's conversation is to really address local issues among people who know and care about these issues. And we're not going to focus so much on partisan politics, but really instead focus on the issues facing Arlington County and our school system. And we're pleased to be joined tonight by Miranda Turner. Thank you again, Miranda, for joining. And I'd like to thank our panelists, current school board vice chair Barbara Cannonen, former school board chair Tanya Talento, and current county board member Christian Dorsey. A little bit about tonight's format. There will be two separate conversations with each candidate lasting approximately 45 minutes. And the conversations will include three areas of focus. How do you plan to work with other school board members and APS staff? What are your top two priorities as a candidate? And where do you see the school system in 10 years, and how will it get there? Each focus area will be led by one of our distinguished panelists, and we're going to have, really it's going to be a conversation though amongst the whole group, and really look forward to having clarifying questions as needed. The full unedited conversations with the candidates will be posted to YouTube and shared through various social media channels. So with that, Miranda, I'll just thank you again for joining us. I'm going to read a brief bio that you provided, and then we'll get started. So Miranda Turner grew up in the area and is the daughter of a Barrett, Kenmore, and Wakefield graduate. She moved to the Green Valley neighborhood in 2014 and lives there with her husband and three children. She is a UVA educated lawyer in private practice in DC. Miranda has been an APS parent since 2015, with her school-age children attending Dr. Charles R. Drew Elementary School and the Montessori Public School of Arlington. Miranda has advocated boundary issues, including the process to redraw the Drew boundary, and served as an active member of the Drew PTA. For the past year, she has advocated for the safe return to schools. And you can visit her website at mirandaturner.org. So thanks again, Miranda, for joining us. It's now my pleasure to turn the microphone over to School Board Vice Chair Barbara Cannonen for the first of our three question and answer segments. Barbara and our other panelists will ask a couple of opening questions and then open the floor for questions from other panelists. So Barbara, over to you.
All right. Thank you, Paul. Thank you for organizing this event. I'm really looking forward to participating in this conversation. And Miranda, thank you for agreeing to be here and also for running. Thank you for running. I think this is going to be an important conversation. Our goal is to be a little bit different from the other debate formats and candidate forums. We want to talk about the work ahead, and especially my interest in how we'll work together as the school board and in collaboration with the county board to best support our students. So as I've watched the campaign this year, also remembering my own campaigns, I'm always struck by how different campaigning is from actually being a board member. You know, when you're campaigning, you're out, you're speaking for yourself, your ideas, you're trying to inspire, you're obviously trying to earn votes. And then when you're on the board, you're working with a set of colleagues, for board colleagues. You're working with staff, you're working with the superintendent. When it comes to decisions, you're 1 out of 5 votes. And that means if you want to get things done, you need to collaborate with your colleagues, collaborate with staff, the superintendent, sometimes negotiate and sometimes compromise to achieve the goals that you believe we need to achieve. So just want to ask you, have you thought about that as you've thought about the actual work of a board member, how you see yourself sort of fitting into that structure of the need to collaborate and working with that full set of players and team?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for doing this. This is a really different format than the other forums, and I appreciate it. It is nicer to have a conversation, and I don't know if you have organized this before, Paul, or you all have participated in this, but it certainly seems like a good way for candidates to become acquainted with your views, from the inside, from having sat on the boards, respective boards, for a couple of years now. So it seems like a great format. So thank you, and I'm happy to be here. Your question has a lot in it. One of the things that Dave Pretty actually said to me when I sat down with him about campaigning, and I think you mentioned it as well, is how much you learn during campaigning. And I've really found that to be true. Obviously, yes, you have to win votes. You have to go out and take positions, say things. If this were more of a political campaign, get out there and have rallies and fire people up and all of that stuff. But the thing that's been really great to me is I have a perspective on many things. And I think I have an overarching understanding about how a board works, basic oversight model. Obviously, votes are critical. Compromise is definitely important. But once you declare as a candidate, as you all now know, you become essentially a public figure. People want your views on things. People want to tell you about their interests and their issues and educate you on stuff. And I think it's fantastic. I've learned more things in the past couple of weeks about APS than in the years that I've been paying attention. And I think I've been paying attention for some years. My kids are young, but it's been really good. And one of the things that I am sort of campaigning on, and it's difficult to campaign in a way because you are running for a job that is going to be 1 of 5. And so you're not running for president. You're not even running for senator. To represent a whole entity where you're sort of on your own. You're running to be part of a collaborative enterprise that's going to have to vote. And so that is always in the back of my mind because frankly, I don't want to haul off and say things that are hypercritical or over the top or any of that. And it's something that is important to keep in mind as a candidate because you are going to be, if you win the job, working with folks. And I do bear that in mind. I think the role of a junior board member is to come in and to learn. Certainly to ask questions and to bring your perspective because you will have been elected and you will have thoughts on matters and folks who voted for you will expect you to bring that perspective to bear. But there's obviously going to be so much to learn, especially in the first couple of months, the first year. I'm sure even after 4 years, I will still feel, if I am to win the seat, like I have a lot to learn. So I think there is definitely an appropriate role for some deference, some ramp up time, and a lot of work, a lot of legwork to understand what the issues are, to read up, to meet with staff and the superintendent, and to understand sort of everybody's perspective who's been on the inside of the state of play. So I think all of that is really important. And should I win the seat, you all will learn that I am a lawyer and I talk a lot. So I'm going to try to curb that impulse right now. But I did want to say, I've lost my train of thought a little bit, but I think it is, well, I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. But yeah, I think coming in with an understanding of the importance of working together and persuading people to your side or not, but at least understanding where folks are coming from and what motivates them, learning about issues that are important to the community, all of that is wrapped up in what I think the board does. And if I am to be seated, I look forward to doing it.
Thank you. I probably shouldn't say this, but I've been on the board for 7 years and I lose my train of thought all the time. And one of the skills, you know, you develop so many skills having to speak in public so often, and you know all sorts of things that board members do. One of the many skills that you learn is how to sort of cover for like losing your train of thought, right?
I didn't do that so expertly this time, but
I was just I
have to appear in
totally
court,
understand.
so this all sort of builds on the skills build on one another. Campaigning, appearing in court, Zoom meetings in front of lots of people that are going to be posted on YouTube. That's all.
And it's, you know, and running, being a candidate is, you know, you have the pressure's on all the time, and it really is, it can be exhausting. So, you know, no, don't worry about that. I want to just follow up a little bit and get a little bit more into the superintendent and staff. And as you know, and I appreciate everything you said about everything you learn when you get out and talk with the community. You have probably found that a number of community members will be critical, especially of our staff, and sometimes of the superintendent, but I would say often of our staff. I will tell you, I have a rule that, and I believe I've never broken it. I feel like the community expects board members to kind of berate staff. And in my opinion, that's never acceptable. You need to work with staff by definition. We rely on them. Even if we think they make mistakes every now and then, or anything that we may disagree on, we rely on their work. They're the full-time professionals. So I wonder, again, if you could share a little bit about if you've thought about that, again, with the kind of feedback you're hearing from the community. How do you then go in as a board member with this kind of background and information people are sharing with you, and bring a collaborative spirit into that process with working with the superintendent and staff? How do you see that playing out?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't see it exactly like I not to, you know, say I disagree or anything, but it has not crossed my mind that the board is supposed to berate the staff. But I do think it's important. I'll give an example. So I think when I was advocating and looking at the 2018 boundary process, right? I know there's always folks who think they can draw a boundary better. And there is so much data that gets put out there, and it's really helpful to crowdsource it in a way. But then of course that leads to folks criticizing what's been done, finding errors, stuff like that. These things happen. And I think it's important from the perspective of a board member to be able to understand enough of the details and the granularity to have a sense for whether the answers, the numbers, all of it sort of hang together. And if you are seeing different proposals, again, this is kind of in the weeds, but if you're seeing different proposals for, you know, percentages of XYZ on demographics or numbers of students or projections, I think that if you're dug in enough and working with the staff, you have a sense for that. And that can sort of throw up red flags or give you a sense of comfort that things are rolling along in the right direction. So in that way, I think it's very important to work with the staff just so that you sort of understand where things are going, and you yourself can respond, because the public comes to you, and you can respond to the criticisms or the comments or the questions in a way that either raises a real issue that you need to take back and ask the staff for clarification, or really reinforces that they're doing it right. And then you can explain, like, this is why I support this direction. Because to me, you know, the lower down you get, the less that you should be on the hot seat, criticized, however you want to put it. So truly, I think, you know, criticism of the superintendent is something that's probably going to happen. Criticism of the school board is undoubtedly something that happens. But I think it's really reflective of strong leadership to stand in front of the folks who work for you and say, you know, I support this. I understand it well enough to explain why. And I am not going to, certainly not going to berate staff in public. If there's a conversation that needs to be had offline, you know, to sort of clarify or change directions, then that's appropriate. But no, I think, you know, you've got to sort of row in the same direction, and be the person who is out front taking responsibility for the final product. And if it's not where you need it to be, then go ask questions, but you know, stand by your folks.
Great, thank you. Christian or Tanya, is there something you all wanted to ask in this vein, or we can move on to Tanya's segment? But wanted to give you all an opportunity to speak to collaboration if you had a question on it.
Mute. I do it all the time.
Thanks, Miranda. Thank you for forgiving my my being on mute.
I don't think I've gone through one of these and not done that. So
as a member of the county board, I'm always keenly interested in how prospective candidates view the dynamics of a school board that is fully autonomous in every way, but still needs to go through the annual exercise if there is a gap between available resources and what they would like to have for the school system, being in the position of asking the county board for supplementary resources. And I'm curious as to how you frame making the case to not just the county board, but the roughly 75% or so of Arlingtonians who do not have children currently in schools.
yeah, and that is, I think, one of the issues. We are a county that is unusually low percentage-wise in terms of families with school-age children, and yet we receive almost half of the revenue under the revenue sharing. To me, parent interested in schools, I think that's appropriate because I think in part, the public schools are, they're incredibly important. They're critical to advancing progressive values and building a strong community like for generations, a future workforce. I think they create ties across communities. I think public schools are one of the most important things that our county does. That said, yes, I understand there are a lot of folks in the county who care less about the schools than I do. And one of the things that I have observed over the past couple of years is that APS sometimes outstrips its allocated revenue in proposing a budget. And then it comes to the county and it asks for more. And it's often with some unfortunate, painful cuts on the table. We saw this year with middle school sports. And I think that it would benefit everyone to be more straightforward about how we're going to approach this and sort of not have it be kind of a holdup problem, but really let's have a conversation about whether at this point we need to broaden the pie of revenue that is shared, or we need to increase the percentage of the pie that is allocated to APS. Again, as a parent, I absolutely prioritize the public schools. And I think it's really important to people in this community because so many of the generation that no longer has school-age kids, they did raise their kids here. My grandparents lived here for a long time. They do not live here anymore. They're not alive anymore. But, I think that it would be important to them. And I know there are lots of folks here who have their grandparents, some of whom live in the homes that they grew up in order to send their kids to the schools. So, it is something that I think is really important to the community. And I also think that given the growth that we've seen in our school system and the expectation that we're going to be above 30,000 pretty soon, and that we really do need construction projects, new facilities. Construction around here is very expensive. Debt service is very expensive. I think there's a real conversation to be had about the type of support that ought to come from the county. And this is not news to anybody on this call, but I do think it would be beneficial to everybody to be a little bit more frank about that sort of thing, instead of proposing a budget that needs millions of dollars additionally in special costs or special revenue every year and going about it that way.
Great. Thanks for that follow-up, Christian. I'm going to turn it over now to Tanya, who's going to take over the next segment and ask a couple questions. So Tanya, over to you.
Thank you, Paul. And thank you all again for inviting me to be here. I really appreciate being part of this conversation. And Miranda, I really look forward to learning more about you as a candidate as we continue the conversation. It is a nice format to actually have a conversation and not have a timer on or not be limited to the how long you can speak or how long you can respond. So I appreciate that. And I wanted to acknowledge that Barbara spoke to the collaboration needed, which I believe is necessary for success in moving the decision-making process forward, moving and improving instruction. Being part of a 5-member board really does require a lot of listening, internal debate amongst your colleagues, a recognition that you're always bringing the voice of the community to the table and to decision making, and recognizing that we all represent different parts of the community when we're serving on an elected board, but that does not mean that there's not a place to find the best decision for everyone in the county. So I really appreciate hearing about that, and listening to how you're thinking about being part of that team and bringing your own perspectives, but yet knowing that you have to work with the team and you're one of five. And so to that end, if we could delve a little deeper into your perspectives, could you tell us a little bit about what your priorities are as a candidate, perhaps your top two issues that you're looking to focus on through your term on the school board should you win?
Yeah, and this is something that I've been thinking a lot about because of our conversation a couple of months ago, where you sort of mentioned exactly this. It's important to sort of come. It's not critical, right? But it's something that you did and others do. They come with certain issues or certain things that really need attention, certain groups that you want to advocate on behalf of, or make sure are being well served in the system. So nobody here is surprised to know that return to school is something that's important to me. And I think that we are going back, and that's a really good thing. It's looking great for the fall. And I think summer school is the trial run, perhaps to some extent, to see how it goes and where kids are. And hopefully we can fully staff it with the assistance of bonuses and what have you, and start getting kids back, both recovering the lost learning time, but also mental and emotional health, and in particular for students with disabilities, compensatory hours and recovery services. I am now acquainted with a lot of parents who have students with significant disabilities who just weren't receiving their therapies in person for such a long time. And they find themselves behind in, a myriad of different ways. And currently it's very difficult to get time back on the schedule. Everybody is stretched. There is no time. Much is still not in person. So I'm really hopeful that we can move forward on that. But I think it's an incredibly important place to focus, because I know teachers are equipped to do this. And I expect that they will be hopefully refreshed in the fall, because I know it's been such a difficult year. But while they are trained and ready to differentiate in the classroom and to target interventions as needed and work in small groups, I am concerned that the range is just going to be much broader than usual. And I'm hopeful that we can, I think it's possible that we're not going to see the rebound in enrollment that we are projecting, and that is in the budget, incorporated in the budget. And that may be a very good thing, right? Because then you have additional staff and teachers who are already there and who are ready to pitch in on this. And I think, I'm not the only one to tout data, but data is going to be important. Consistent metrics reported the same way year over year, same population, quarter over quarter, however you want to do it, to take a look and see what we are seeing, who needs help, and whether we're achieving progress for those particular students, those particular populations, whatever it shows, whatever the data shows in terms of who needs help getting back after this year. That's something I think is incredibly important. And then going forward, since you asked for two issues, I think one of the things that has often been said, I know everybody has probably heard it, is this concept of system of schools and consistency across schools. I think it was manifest this year in terms of how different schools dealt with certain aspects of instruction during the pandemic. So that's one example. It has been said before that it comes up with things like literacy instruction, other choices of curriculum. I think it is something that was really highlighted, and not necessarily in a good way, in the 2019 program evaluation for students with disabilities. I've talked to a lot of people who, say that their experience is completely different depending on what school they're at, and they literally move school to school to try to get better services for their children. So that's also something that I would like to see as we move forward and have, over a longer time horizon, that we work to improve. And it's my sense, and you all will tell me if I'm wrong, because you're on the inside and I'm still on the outside, but it's my sense that Dr. Duran is focused on this and is moving us in this direction. And so I'm hopeful that we're off to a good start and that this can continue.
Thank you, Miranda, for sharing your top two priorities. And I know as a candidate, I'm sure there are more, but we appreciate hearing about that. But I want to pivot a little bit on this. Um, I think one of the hardest things coming on as a school board member is that you campaign almost a whole year before you actually join. So if you win, you'll be joining January 1st, 2022. And you come in literally in the midst, like 4 weeks, 4 to 6 weeks, I believe, maybe 6 to 8, before the superintendent presents his or her proposed budget. And then you're in the height of budget season. And this coming year, that'll be immediately followed by the adoption of the 10-year CIP. And you're also coming in the midst of policies, reviews, developments, updates, a schedule that has been determined, usually in the summer, what policies we're going to be looking for, which ones are due for updates. Some of them are very involved with the community, can be controversial, or they're new policies. So how do you look? And also, before I go to the question, we're also going to be at the third year of our DOJ settlement agreement for our English learner services. So with knowing that you have these priorities in mind, how are you thinking about coming in January 1st and being ready to deal with all of these things that are actual annual school board responsibilities and requirements, budget adoption, 10-year CIP, policy development, in the midst of that? How are you preparing for that? And have you thought about understanding that these will take a lot of time? How are you preparing for that? And how are you looking at that work, considering the priorities that you mentioned with the prior question?
Yep. Homework, lots and lots of homework. And it starts early. I think one of the things I've said since I started this campaign is, yes, I have perspectives. Yes, I have particular issues that are important to me, but it's very important to me to talk to a wide swath of the community and to all of the elected officials and unelected officials who will talk to me, because if I get the job, I want to do a good job. And so I need to learn about all manner of things, and I need to read up on stuff, watch all the meetings. And that's what you do when you campaign, because people ask you stuff. You've got forums and the new thing that I saw on Twitter. I'd like to have your take on it. And did you see what was said at the last budget meeting and the work session, et cetera, et cetera. And it's a lot. It's a lot right now. And I'm trying to campaign. And I think as the summer wears on and into the fall, I will be continuing to do this if I win the endorsement. I think I have to pull out if I don't win the endorsement. But it's the campaign, as I mentioned earlier, is like boot camp to some extent. It gets you educated on the issues and it brings people out to meet with you, which is great. So I definitely plan to continue to do that. And then the election is in November, and I don't know the answer, but I might expect or ask for or hope that there is a transition, a ramp up period where you have 2 months before you are seated, and it's, where's my binder and what am I going to be expected to come in and start to help with? And I very much understand that there's a lot. There's going to be I imagine, a difficult budget situation in 2022, just as there was this year. And yeah, I read a lot and deal with a lot of information professionally. And that's the answer. You dig in, you read, you do the work, you talk to people, you get different perspectives, and you make sure that you save enough time to sit back and figure out what you think so that you can be a part of the conversation in a productive way.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Paul, I'm going to turn it over to you if you want to do follow-ups, or I can continue to ask a few questions.
I would see if Barbara or Christian want to follow up with a question.
Sure. Am I going ahead, Paul?
If you'd like, you're welcome to, Barbara.
Sure. Yeah, actually, I would love to, because I really wanted to dive into the system of schools comment. And especially, and again, this is the kind of like difference between campaigning and then, doing the job is, obviously in the job, you really do have to balance the budget. And I know you get asked all the time how you would do it. But there's a difference, as you know, because you can wave your hands a little bit more with some comments. The fact is that the system of schools issue is in direct opposition budget-wise with things like class size and things happening, in our schools, right? So, and we're hearing from our staff now that, are we putting too much into central office when we need to put more into schools? But system of schools means, oversight, professional development, central office types of activities, which is typically where candidates talk about having to cut to balance the budget. So how do you see this sort of class size and central office kind of trade-off when you actually have to balance the budget and hopefully build sustainability going forward?
Right. I think it's exactly the tension. It's what, 20% of the budget roughly is not personnel staff. So there's not a lot of room to play with there. So, you can march around and say, yes, I'm going to cut administrative overhead, but there is not that much to cut compared to the whole pie. And I think that there is a sense, and I can't really comment on it or not, but there's certainly a possibility that the central office staff is very stretched thin, and that we may still be building up to the size of school district that we need in terms of central office administration. I know Dr. Duran is trying to build out more of a structure underneath him with the COO role and the in-house counsel role. And I'm certainly never going to argue with an in-house counsel. I think that that is actually a very good way to provide sort of consistent oversight within your organization and avoid expensive issues. Tanya, you alluded to the DOJ settlement, but certainly other more run-of-the-mill issues, just sort of cut them off before they get to be bigger problems that cost more money. So I think there is very much a tension between what we have to do centrally in order to smooth over the inconsistencies between schools versus having all of the schools off on their own as more independent islands. One is cheaper, one is more expensive. But I think, to the extent that you can identify duplication of effort, then you can try to make sure you're getting most efficient use of your dollars in the administration. You've got folks doing things that should be pushed out and pushed down at the school level, and make sure that you're really getting value out of there, and you're not pushing something out that is going to wind up becoming, not utilized as efficiently at the school level. So if you are taking a decision on what type of curriculum to push out at the central office level, and you offer an array of choices, and then you've got the different schools implementing their selection or their different choice based on the principal's preference or the teachers or what have you. Is that the most efficient way to make a decision? Do we have people doing the same work? It's stuff like that, and it's difficult, obviously, from the outside perspective to dig in and see where, if at all, there are savings. But there may be, and then again, there may be something that is a conversation for a broader, higher level conversation about whether, again, as we grow into a bigger and more sophisticated school system, we need to have more revenue overall in order to support the type of office administration that we need in order to support our schools and make sure our kids are getting a consistent experience.
Great. Thank you for that, Miranda. And Tanya, thank you for leading that segment. I'm going to turn it over to Christian now for the final portion or final conversation piece of tonight's event.
Well, thank you, Paul. Thank you so much. And Miranda, thank you very much for participating in this experimental concept. I too am very much looking forward to having a different kind of conversation than candidates are usually afforded with the various forums. And I'd just like to thank Tanya and Barbara for the engaging conversation thus far. I'll try to live up to it with some question prompts to get you thinking and talking. So I'd like to focus a little bit on the future. And if you could sort of put yourself in the perspective of thinking about where APS should be headed. And I'd love to hear kind of what you think the intermediate vision should be. And you can think about this in terms of qualitative or quantitative outcomes, curriculum, the instructional delivery model, whatever. But where should APS be headed in the future? And what are the necessary steps that you would want to take within your 4-year term to get to your ultimate vision?
Sure. Big question. I think we will be in the future a larger and, like I said, more sophisticated school system. But I think there's a real question about when that will happen. Enrollment is down. I don't expect it to rebound right away. I think everybody, including me, does expect it to come back and then to push us past the 30,000, but it may not. Certainly, it's ebbed and flowed over time. And the pandemic, in particular in Arlington, with our commercial real estate reliance, I think, the next couple of years, seeing what offices do in the non-school setting, right? This is just how the county is going to be looking forward. I think it will be interesting to see what happens. But I do think that we'll get better. That we'll get bigger. And I think that in the near term, one of the things I would be interested in seeing is I don't know if expansion is the right term, but more, I would like to see Arlington Tech start to sort of come up to the same level as the other high schools, just in terms of how we conceptualize our high schools. I think right now we think we have 3 high schools, and that's not quite right. I think Arlington Tech is a really interesting model that's not well understood. It's not perfectly understood by me, but it offers a core set of traditional courses, social studies, Spanish, the like, in addition to the career orientation and the technical orientation. And I think that in a place like Arlington, where we've got so many dynamic opportunities like politics and, or regular small businesses, bars, restaurants, consulting firms, Verizon, Hilton, the big names, stuff like that in the area, I think that it's a really neat opportunity to sort of allow kids to experience something a little bit different in terms of their education, but also really prepare for not only a work life, but the sort of soft skills is the way the Chamber of Commerce would say it, right? But also the things that are really important as you move into adulthood in terms of poise, presentation, ability to stand in front of a room of adults and hold your own and express yourself clearly. And things like that are changing all the time in terms of the exposure that our kids get, especially, not to sound like a Luddite or anything, but kids these days are always on their devices. And I think stuff like that's really valuable. And that type of dynamic education, from what I understand of it, really can be something that sets a school in Arlington apart. And that to me is something that is actually very special and innovative about Arlington and APS. And I'd be interested in seeing it broadened, given more attention, given a bigger role in APS.
And, getting at what might be some of the near-term things that you could think about doing to maybe push in that direction. And you don't need to go through all of them, but if there's, one of those elements that you particularly think there are a few steps that really should be on the table for discussion and perhaps implementation to get to that place where you've got a curriculum that's able to deliver effective soft skills instruction, and you have a robust Arlington Tech that is viewed on par with the other schools. What's it going to take?
You're not going to make me talk about where I would move schools or anything, are you?
No.
No boundary discussions.
No.
That's not fair. I think the obvious answer would be Amazon moving in, right? But that is kind of simplistic and just an easy thing to toss off the cuff. I think there remains the sense that we need some form of 4th high school. Well, you know what? I didn't mention HB Woodlawn, right? So 5th high school, but you understand what I mean. And I think that that space, the Career Center property and the things that are located there, that is going to need to be turned into something relatively comprehensive, I think. And I don't want to get in trouble with my neighbors because it's a really challenging site with not as much space as the other high schools. but that in the near term seems like something that's going to need some attention. And I know there's been ideas floated in the past, including as recently as the fall, in terms of an all virtual curriculum. I think there is a way, and I'm confident that the staff has ideas about this for how to really vet community interest and demand for these sorts of things. And if there is a demand for a virtual option going forward, then that's something that's worth exploring. But otherwise, I think, we kind of need to look at what we have and make sure that if we go forward in a direction, we're not, taking a if we build it, they will come sort of approach, but we are doing things that are based on what's really going to interest the community and serve our kids.
Thank you. And with this forward-looking look, both APS and Arlington County have really embraced, in my opinion, thoughtfully, how to implement and have our respective organizations have equity as a guiding principle in all that we do, and beyond rhetoric, to really figure out what it takes from a systems implementation point to get there. Now, with all caveats that for many, equity is still somewhat inchoate. There's not a universal understanding of exactly what it means. I'm really interested in, from your perspective, what do we need to do to move forward in order to tackle these big issues and to be where we want to be, while also adhering to sound fundamental principles of equity, which truly, value all members of our community.
Yep. It's an incredibly difficult and broad subject. I think about it in a couple of different ways. There's, I think, qualitative and quantitative aspects to it. And some of the qualitative stuff that's going on right now, I think, is very important. I mean, there's the equity office, and there's, the concept of pushing the equity teams into schools. But then there's also even more nebulous stuff, like the fact that at every forum that I go to as a candidate, almost every forum, there's a question about SROs in schools. And there are questions about how you would advance equity. Like, what would you do? How do you think about it? And that, to me, is a really good thing, because it's reflecting the fact that our community as a whole is not, nobody anymore is thinking about this as a Black issue or a minority issue, or just something off to the side. This is something that's really important to our whole community, and that, to me, says some of the qualitative stuff that we're doing is we're making progress. The quantitative stuff is, I think, the persistent gaps in opportunity and achievement, and to me, a very direct way to try to address that. It's certainly not something that's easy and not something that nobody's thought of before, but to measure it. It was very impactful on me that around the time I first moved here, I think it was the Green Valley Civic Association had to FOIA some data to break out the scores between Drew and the Montessori program. And that, to me, is telling, because it says not only do we have this issue, but somebody had to go get it, and it wasn't out in the open. And I think that it's important to track data, again, have it be collected and reported in the same way, cut it however you want, and then take a look at it and see if you're making progress, because the definition of equity, you said it was, a little bit inchoate, but the one that resonates to me is what Aaron Gregory has said, which is you know that you are achieving equity if you can't predict somebody's outcome based on their membership in a particular demographic group. And I don't know how you get there if you're not looking at data. So from that perspective, quantitative and qualitative are both important. And then the last thing I'll say is I used to work in public health before I went to law school, and we had these concepts of process monitoring and outcome monitoring. And so even if you couldn't well monitor an outcome, or you couldn't necessarily expect big shifts in behavior or outcomes or what have you, you could still monitor your process. And you could see how many touches you're putting on a particular problem or a particular population, or any manner of things that you could do. I was in a different world. It was like drug and alcohol addiction and HIV prevention and stuff like that. So very different, but you could measure the things that you were doing that you thought were going to be effective at reaching different populations and providing particular services, providing particular education or engagement or outreach. And you could track that. And I think it's important to track from a process standpoint as well. in addition to trying to track from an outcome standpoint.
Great. Thank you both. Thank you, Christian, for leading that segment. We are coming up on the end of our time, but Miranda, I just wanted to give you a brief opportunity to maybe make a closing statement if you'd like, and then I'll just run through some final wrap up points for folks.
Yeah, I'll give it a go. I mean, I will tell you, this is new to me, and certainly, again, I'm the outsider and the newcomer, and having time with you all is both really valuable and a little intimidating, because you've been doing this for many years and I haven't, and so I'm here to say what I think is important and how I would approach it. But of course, you actually know how it works. So I really appreciate the opportunity, and I think fundamentally, regardless of what issues have brought me here, I really stand by the fact that if I am to win the seat, I do want to do a good job, because this school system is very important to me. It's important to my kids. It's important to all the kids in the community. And I think that it is something we all take a lot of pride in. And I do believe that we're going to come back from this very divisive year and move forward. And there is, work to be done in certain areas to make sure we're well serving all of our kids. But I'm optimistic, and I really appreciate your time tonight.
Great. Thanks so much, Miranda. Certainly want to just say thank you for running. It's a huge endeavor for you, for your family, and really just appreciate the time and commitment to Arlington and what you're doing on behalf and having the conversations like this and many others. So thank you for that.
Thank you for organizing it and for being the community leader in that regard.
Sure. No, glad to. Just want to say thanks again to the panelists. The full unedited videos of tonight's event will be posted to YouTube in the coming days. I know that a number of current or former electeds, as well as activists, are very interested in posting it, and will likely share it through their emails and social media accounts. Just as a reminder, the school board caucus will take place from Monday, May 17th through Sunday, May 23rd, 2021. Voting will be open 24/7 during the week of voting, and the platform will be mobile device compatible. You can visit https://arlingtondemocrats.org/vote/SB caucus anytime between May 17th to 23rd to access the voting portal via computer, tablet, or mobile phone. The caucus will determine who the Arlington Democrats will support between the two candidates competing, and it will be for the November 2nd general election. Again, thank you for joining us and very much appreciate it. Thanks again to Miranda, and everyone have a good night.
Thank you.